I'm selling my house in Virginia, what am I required to disclose to the buyers? I'm going to answer this question based on Code of Virginia, Chapter 7, Virginia Residential Disclosure Act. I'll start off with answering simple questions like, what is property disclosure? Who and what types of properties are covered in this law? Who is exempt? What are the required list of disclosures? I'll also give you 2 caveats to the law so you don't accidentally commit fraud. Let's answer the first question. What is property disclosure? Property disclosure is when you tell a potential buyer about known problems or issues about the house that you're selling before they buy it. I'll give you typical disclosures people make. Water damage history, roof age and condition, foundation issues, electrical or plumbing problems, HVAC system age and maintenance, previous renovations with or without building permit, environmental issues like radon or lead-based paint, boundary disputes with neighbors, HOA rules and fees. Those are typical disclosures people make. Let's answer the question. The scope of the law. Who's covered? What types of properties are covered? If someone is selling a residential property, which is the most common case, they're all covered in this law. The law also covers some uncommon situations where you're exchanging your property with another property, or if you're leasing your property with option to buy, or if a buyer is buying from you with installation agreement where you're acting kind of like a bank. They're paying you slowly. It's all covered. Also, if you're selling your house as for sale by owner, you're also covered under this law. And more common case is you have a realtor. You're also covered under this law. All right, what types of properties are covered? Single-family homes, condos, duplex, co-op, a multiplex, 2, 3, 4 units, multiplex. If you're selling a house with more than 4 units or a big building apartment, this law does not apply. Or if you're selling a commercial building, this law does not apply. Who are exempt? I'll just run down the list. Estate sales, inherited properties, bank-owned, foreclosure properties, government agency sales, court order sales, and new constructions. They're all exempt. New constructions are exempt as long as they did not violate any applicable building code. In other words, if they have the occupation certificate and they meet the code, they don't need to disclose anything. But if they don't meet the code, they have to give you a material defects list. And like I mentioned, commercial properties are not included. Even if it was residential property, but it was a big apartment complex with more than 4 units, they're exempt from this law. And in general, the reason behind this exemption is the seller typically lacks first-hand knowledge about the property's conditions. What are the required disclosures? Let's go straight to Code of Virginia, Chapter 7. If you go here, you'll see 9 disclosures. One of them is repelled, which means not applicable. The other one is permissive disclosure, which means it's allowed disclosure, it's not required disclosure. So that leaves us 7 required disclosures. And out of these 7 required disclosures, 1 is applicable to everybody who's required to disclose under this law. That leaves us 6 disclosures that may be required if they're applicable to you. So because these 6 requirements are less common, I'll go over them real quickly, just in case if you're covered under that requirement. And then we'll take some time explaining the one that's applicable to everybody, which is Section 703. Okay, I'm going to start with 704. Required disclosures pertaining to a military air installation. If your house is located within a designated noise zone, for example, if you live very close to Dulles Airport or Reagan National Airport, not just close, but you have to be within a designated noise zone. Then, per this chapter, you're required to disclose. Or if your property is in an accident potential zone where there's a high risk from military aircraft operation, you have to disclose that information. The next chapter is repelled. The next chapter is pending building or zoning violation. So if you have any existing violation notices issued by your county or city, or if you have any pending enforcement actions related to building code or zoning ordinances, or if you have any unresolved notices of violations, you have to disclose that information. The next required disclosure is lis pendens. It's a Latin term for lawsuit pending. So it would apply if someone filed a legal claim against your property. They can basically go and put a lis pendens notice in the public records. So it'll warn the potential buyers that there's a legal dispute involving your property that you're trying to sell. The next disclosure is permissive disclosure, tourism activity zone. Fun fact, Virginia has 75 tourism activity zones. But if you live in Northern Virginia, there's no official tourism activity zone. So if you're trying to sell a property in Northern Virginia, this does not apply. Well, even if you live in Virginia, it's permissive disclosure. The next required disclosure is property previously used to manufacture meth, even if it's been properly cleaned according to Virginia guidelines, because it has a serious health hazard posed by the chemical residue. The next required disclosure is stormwater management facilities. If you have a present stormwater facilities located on your property, this would apply. The next required disclosure is pertaining to repetitive loss. For example, if your property flooded multiple times and you claimed insurance multiple times, or if your property has history of flood insurance claims, you have to disclose that information. Let's talk about that one required disclosure that's applicable to everybody under this law. Chapter 55.1-703 required disclosures for buyers to beware, buyers to exercise necessary due diligence. Because it's required by everybody to disclose this information, whether you're selling your house for sale by owner or with a real estate agent, you're required to print this entire document and hand it over to the buyer. It turns out to be about 4-page document. So if you click here, you'll see the entire thing. You can get the same thing from DPOR website, which I'll leave a link to this. And if you read this whole thing, basically it'll say, owner makes no representation or warranty about the condition of the property. That's right. Basically, it's saying the seller is not required to list any known defects, even though this is a 4-page disclosure statement. The title says everything. It says buyer to be aware, buyer to exercise necessary due diligence. It puts the responsibility to find out what's wrong with the property on the buyer. Buyer has to do their own investigation. Buyer has to do their own due diligence to find out what is wrong with your property, if there's anything wrong with it. They have to find out themselves. But remember, I said I'm going to give you 2 caveats. I'm going to tell you the caveats now. 1, let's say a potential buyer walks in and asks you specifically, hey, Mr. Mrs. Seller, has your basement been flooded while you lived in this house? Or do you know of any flooding history before you moved into this house? Now you're on the hook to answer truthfully. Now you're hooked to answer truthfully, otherwise you're committing fraud. You can say, okay, let me think about it and get back to you about that. That's fine, but you have to get back with them with the truth. You can't avoid the question. You can't hide the issue. You have to tell them the truth. The other caveat is, let's say you're walking around with the real estate agent that you're thinking about hiring, but maybe ultimately you end up hiring. Okay, let's say you're with your realtor that you'll be working with. You're walking around the house and you mention, oh yeah, 3 years ago our basement flooded. Well, now the real estate agent knows about that information, and he or she needs to or must disclose that information, because real estate agents work with a higher standard. This law applies to the homeowner. Real estate agents have a different law that we operate under. And if we know a property condition that we're helping the seller sell, we have to disclose that information. We can't scheme together. I can't just say, oh, I'll just pretend like I never heard it. And if you're wondering, okay, Achma, what do you tell your clients? Here's what I tell my clients. Disclose, disclose, disclose. Of course, we're not going to disclose just for sake of honesty. We're going to disclose with strategy, because we don't want the buyers to get scared and run away. We don't want buyers to double dip and try to offer less money. And that video is coming up soon. I hope this information was useful. Good luck with the sales of your house. I'm Achma, Realtor in Sterling, Virginia, your guide to maximize the value of your house. Thanks for watching.